This is the Darbin Orvar podcast, a companion to my YouTube channel about making and building. Here we talk about things surrounding those subjects, as well as thoughts about culture, society, science, and anything in between. Thank you for listening.
This is episode 3 of the Darbin Orvar podcast.
Yes, episode number 3.
So what do you want to talk about today, Linn?
Well, today I wanted to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart, really, and that is the concept of women in woodworking, or maybe more the lack of women in woodworking. And going from that, really, it relates to women in science and engineering and STEM, and I think it all is very, related to woodworking in that sense, that it's a hard subject.
That most women don't attempt.
Why are there so few women in these areas?
Now, I don't know if there's the same percentage in those other subjects as there is in woodworking.
Well, if you look at the woodworking, and if you look at the information that we have available to us through what's public and what's known, like on YouTube, for example, men are overriding women in a huge percentage. There are not that many girls who do woodworking on YouTube. And metalworking.
A lot of those kind of subjects.
Exactly. There are more girls doing maybe blogs that are related to building than
DIY though.
Very DIY focused.
And they're coming more from a little bit simpler point of view than the.
Yes, often I would say it's more of a practical point of view.
They're not garage woodworkers.
No, it's more like I want to build this piece of furniture for my house, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay. As opposed to, hey, I want to hang out in my shop and do cool stuff. It's not really the same mentality.
Not a whole lot of girls do that. Yeah.
No, I don't know. Yeah, no.
Not too
which really makes me wonder. I think that woodworking and building is a wonderful area to be in.
Yeah, for anybody.
Because it's great on so many levels. It makes you confident. It's good to build things. It's good to be self-sufficient. And I just see positive things with it, which really makes me wonder.
What's the cause of lack of women in woodworking?
Why are there not more women in woodworking?
Well, I guess historically there have not been a whole lot of women working in shops or designing furniture in general.
No, I mean it is traditionally a very male-dominated field.
It's a lot of physical work.
Yeah, exactly.
It used to be more physical than
now.
Well,
exactly. You would almost think now with the rise of power tools that it would enable more girls and women to get into it. Because it's not as physically demanding when you can use power tools. It's like you don't have to. You can use a table saw. You don't have to cut things by hand, which is exhausting sometimes, even though it can be fun.
Yeah. But a lot of lumber is pre-milled,
right?
So it's lighter.
So you don't have to deal with that,
and you don't have to deal with it at all.
Right.
And with pocket screws.
Right. There are some exactly.
Very cheap
Building
tools
in
too.
general is less demanding physically.
Yeah.
Because yes, you don't have to make dovetails or box joints or things by hand, which was very.
Well, that time-consuming aspect actually, you think would suit women very much. It's handwork. It's very specific.
If you do it from a relaxing hobby point of view.
From a hobby point of view.
Yeah, I would think so. Which really makes me think, when you put it that way, that it really makes me think that they just haven't discovered it. There's so
possible.
Many people who have just never been subjected to it, to where it's
subjected is a negative term.
I guess it is. Yeah, I guess it is negative. But I mean,
maybe given the opportunity to see it,
where it hasn't been in their environment, where they haven't been given the opportunity to try it out. They have not even. It doesn't even enter their mind that they would even like it.
I guess the whole concept of shop class too. They probably wouldn't have done any kind of hand tools. Anyway.
Shop class, I think, in many ways has a negative connotation for girls. In the sense that it feels very hard, feels very male. It doesn't seem very inviting.
So
in some situation, at least.
I guess you're saying that if it had more of a craft feel.
Although I hate that too. I hate putting it in those terms.
We're basically saying that women are different than men. In the sense that they look at it differently, they would take it differently.
It's almost like, I think that maybe they respond to marketing in a different way. What's being traditionally marketed to them as something that they are welcome into, a field where they are not, where they feel like they belong. I feel like so many women don't feel like they belong in the woodworking shop. Okay. And I don't think that's something that they, I think that is the environment that makes them feel that way, or their history.
Mm-hmm. That they never were exposed to it.
They were never exposed to it, and they never saw, examples of why it would be a good thing for them to try out.
How important do you think examples are?
I was thinking about this before, and I think that okay, maybe we should go back a little bit and think about what is really, what do we really want from women in general? And I would say what we want from everybody are to be to feel more capable, to be more confident, and all those things which go along with building. And I was actually thinking about this whole thing with role models before, because I just think that girls have so many role models in the people who they look up to, who are actresses and singers and things like that they maybe mimic when they are young. But very few are actually looking up to female scientists or female, explorers, or people who are actually doing things. So
instead of just looking good.
Instead of just looking good, sounding good, whatever it may be. Things that most girls look up to are not practical. They are not where they actually are. I mean, I don't want to say accomplish something, because you can accomplish something with a great song, but or a great performance, but something where they actually build something and it develops their mind.
And adds to society in more of a structured or physical way.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that so many girls, and I remember thinking this too when I was young and was like in math class, and I was thinking why, am I going to use this when I grow up? And not really understanding or having any great examples to think about how it would even be, why it would be useful for me. And I think that if I had more female scientists or engineers or people who I actually saw in front of me, who I realized were doing cool stuff because they knew those things, then I would have thought that was much more exciting. There was an end goal.
So there's a lack of the media talking about this too?
Yes.
And a lack of, I guess, the curriculums in school adding these kind of...
It's almost like
things.
There's something wrong with the perception of it in general, yes. It's like the concept of role models. I mean, in some ways, when you hear that, you're like, people talk about role models, and maybe, it can kind of get I don't know.
Sappy?
A little bit sappy, where you're like, we need more role models, and it just sounds kind of bad.
Yeah.
But then when I think about the practical application of that, how that just means that you understand the end goal. I mean, you understand why something is cool and useful, and then...
The applied part of learning.
Right. Then it makes much more sense. And I mean, for example, if we just take woodworking, for example, what girls do woodworking, that other girls know of?
Well, I guess we got Norm and Roy.
We have Norm and Roy. And of course, things are changing. There are more girls with blogs and in YouTube, but that's all. Yeah. Other than maybe Martha Stewart did a little building here and there or something like that.
Yeah. More decorating, probably.
More decorating. Although she was a little bit into furniture renovation, and she did some of that, but... otherwise,
but no hard woodworking.
No.
No
actual techniques. No. So, I think that the lack of role models in that sense is a big problem. But I'm not saying that just from a woodworking point of view. I'm talking about from from all hard subjects in that sense, which I think very much relates.
So there's some kind of negativity going towards girls, but also maybe other people too, that discourage them from getting into harder subjects in general. I mean, not many people take math or the hard sciences at all anyway.
No.
So there's something across the board that can be said about that.
Yeah.
Not just girls.
No, yeah. It's almost like there's so many roadblocks in those subjects.
Like what you were doing in your math video.
In the math video, the fraction video that I did a couple of weeks back now.
Which I think was a little misunderstood.
Yeah, I think so too.
But let's clarify that point.
The video was really about my love of fractions.
Or math in general.
Well, math in general, but just how cool fractions are, and why it's so awesome that you can divide things in half and half and half and basically create your own measuring system.
And the fact that fractions are usually the first stumbling block to people going further in math.
Right. It's one of those things that people get confused about early on. And then because math uses fractions so much, go from that point on, if you are confused about that, and if you feel like, oh, I'm never gonna get it, then you have basically closed that door for the future.
And that's usually when parents have difficulty helping kids with homework for the first time.
Yeah.
They think they're really smart with some simple arithmetic, but a little more fraction oriented, and they have a problem. And so it discourages the kid then.
Yeah.
And then it makes them think, well, if they don't like it, well, why should I?
It's funny, yeah. It's almost like often parents, may say that where they want to impart, like, oh, don't feel bad. I wasn't good at this either.
It has the opposite effect.
But it really has the opposite effect, because then you don't feel like, I don't know, it almost has a negative impact on you as opposed to a positive. You know, it's like, it's okay if I don't do this well.
It's okay if you're bad.
It's okay if I'm bad at this.
And so what do? You're bad.
You're bad, right. Where
so
instead,
that's the solution
it should be like, this is really cool. Work through it. It's important and it's awesome once you get it. I
guess everybody tends to see those kind of subjects as difficult, and subjects like English or history as softer or easier. But really, all those subjects are difficult.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't
but
everything
the parent
difficult?
Doesn't. It's almost like a math problem for a kid in school, a third grader, a fifth grader, whatever it is. The parent, basically, that's a big stumbling block. Mm-hmm. Whereas if it's like, read a paragraph and give me like reading comprehension,
it's more subjective.
Then it's easier for the parent to fudge their way along.
Right.
So they look at it as like, oh, maybe English and history is easier, but really it's not.
Yeah.
It's just as difficult as math is,
right.
Or any other science too.
Well, I guess where things like that are subjective and there's no definite answer, it is much easier to not like.
Yeah. So the problem with math is that it's
right or wrong.
It's too much right or wrong.
It's too much work.
It's presented that way too much in homework.
Yeah.
Kids can be easily influenced by their parents in a negative way, or even teachers. I've heard teachers say the same thing, where it is like, okay, I know this is not really going to be that important in your future, but it's something we have to go through.
Right, and we have to make sure you can pass this test.
It's almost like if you look at it, you can say that 90% of kids fail out of fractions, and 90% of kids fail out of algebra, and then another 90% fail out of calculus.
And by the time we're at that point, there's very few
and there you
left.
have your professional mathematicians left.
Yeah.
Which is very few.
Yeah, not a whole lot.
Yeah. And most of the hard sciences have some math involved in college anyway, so that kind of ends up distracting people from going into hard sciences.
Yeah. Right. Well, one thing that kind of strikes me, though, about building and about woodworking is that it's actually, first of all, I think it's just a good thing. It's just good to build. It's good to know that stuff. It's a positive quality. It really is nothing negative about it. Just to be more, you feel more confident and you know how things work. And exactly. To not be timid by those things. And I would say that's true for everybody, but maybe especially for girls who might not be exposed to that normally or might not be playing in that same way.
Well, that goes for the same thing. We often talk about the girls, but most guys don't do these things either. And so just because you're talking about some of the well-known people in building or math or whatever happen to be men, the rest of the men aren't doing anything either.
Would you say this is more of a modern symptom or
no, I think
all through the
all
time?
Through history.
Yeah.
No, I think a lot of people...
Well, okay, so if you put it from that point of view, that the men who are doing things are just louder and more vocal and more...
I don't mean it in a negative way. I just mean that it just happens to be that some of the best people in some of these areas happen to be men.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they're only men.
Yeah.
They are seen more. I mean, the media picks up on a great architect that's a man, or a great business that's run by a man, or something like that. It doesn't mean that women aren't doing those things,
but they're not as visible.
They're not as visible. Maybe there's not as many.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. There may not be as many, but you just don't know of them. They're not presented in the same way.
It's that concept of extremes too. That Y chromosome adds a lot of it adds a lot of variability.
Yeah.
And some people would explain everything by that, but I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess one thing that I was getting to is that whereas I think that woodworking and building is just a good thing, but it also is great if we go back to the math and the sciences, because it really gives you a great stepping stone to those areas, to science and engineering
because it's
and
similar,
math.
because it's the applied version of those things. Because it
actually gives you a real representation of how things work.
Yeah.
It's in that way, if you go into those areas later on, then you have more of an understanding
practical
of forces
It's kind of the same way if girls grow up without playing, sports of any type. They have no kind of sense of the physics of throwing a baseball or kicking a ball.
And that's
whatever.
exactly, it's experience.
Yeah.
And that's where that comes into play. If you don't have the experience, you're just going to
you almost
not
have bad judgment.
Exactly, you have bad judgment because you don't have that innate kind of feeling for things.
So when you go to build a robot that smashes into a different robot, like in an engineering competition or something, you don't have the same sense as the boys do because they have the innate experience.
They have played more with those things, crashed more things, and if you haven't done that, then you are at a disadvantage.
Yeah, not only may you be afraid of breaking something, but you also might not realize what happens when something flips over or smashes into something.
And that's another thing, the fear of breaking things, which I'm sure applies to boys and girls. But when I grew up, it was very prevalent among many of my friends and me, where I remember, I grew up in Sweden and we took shop class growing up. And it was actually kind of, interesting how we took shop class starting from like 7th grade, not 7th grade, from when we were like 7 years old up to like 12 or something like that. But it was 6 months wood shop and 6 months sewing, and that was true for both boys and girls. But the whole thing about being afraid of breaking things, I remember we had like one of the main things we used in shop class was like a scroll saw, and I remember breaking so many blades on that scroll saw, up to the point where I was getting afraid of using it because I just felt like I was breaking it too much. Like I just didn't have the right technique. I was probably making too many turns or whatever, and it would have been easy to fix. But it almost left this negative thing where I was afraid to use it, where I really shouldn't have been. And I feel like that is just something that many people, if they are young, that's like one thing that you really have to combat. That you should not be afraid of break things. You should not, and that's why I think that more people need to get introduced to woodworking and things like that, because you inherently are breaking things in a sense when you do woodworking and when you build things. Because you make mistakes and you're actually cutting things, you're actually breaking things in that sense where you are like actually destroying things, breaking things, and that's a good thing. It's so easy to be a timid person when you're young, and I think that is especially true for girls.
And the parents are kind of feeding on
exactly
that too.
The girls are it's society and the parents are feeding into it, where you're like a good girl, and it's kind of like a positive feedback loop where you're such a good girl, you're so quiet, you're so polite,
so
you're
of course
so friendly.
You break things.
And you want to stay in that. It's like a positive feedback
They're
loop.
praising you for that.
They're
so
praising you for
there.
the same behavior that is going to make you do nothing. Which is going to make you do nothing interesting.
Yeah.
Which is why I think that's important that is to change. You can't praise things for being timid and quiet and sweet and friendly,
or helpless.
Yeah. Exactly. It's important that people
it's too easy to feed into people's sadness or fear.
Yeah.
When parents do
I understand that you're feeling bad. Don't feel bad. I did bad too.
Yeah.
And let's not do that anymore.
And that basically will break somebody off from going in that direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Why would you go towards what's bad?
Right.
When you were in shop class, what kind of things were they even making?
Well, you know what? That's another thing that when I think of woodworking, I think it's great because it like makes you capable and like for the future, where you can fix things and make things and fit things for your environment. And when I think about wood shop when I grew up, I think that in some ways it was like trinket a little bit. I feel like not enough emphasis was placed on the actual basic skills. Well, of course that's true for any class, maybe really introduction to something. But we did like little wooden spoons, wooden knives, not even spoons, wooden knives, and little clothes hangers and small things, which I guess makes sense. Very craft oriented things. And I think now, looking back, that there was just not enough emphasis on technique, on concepts, maybe. There's just, you want just the end result in that sense. But I think it would have been useful to have more overall kind of learning and philosophy.
And providing confidence in a sense.
And providing confidence because you know how to do something then. It's not just like accomplish this little thing, you know? Which of course I loved. I loved accomplishing these little things. I loved building these little things. I thought it was the most fun thing ever.
But it didn't go any further.
Exactly, but it was really kind of closed off. And it wasn't like until, you know, later on when I, you know, adult-wise, when I kind of picked it up more and kind of fell in love with it in a sense. So I wouldn't say that my woodworking came entirely from my, you know, education in Sweden. You know, it was like maybe an introduction, but it wasn't like be all and
end all and be all.
End all and be all.
Okay. I guess so. A lot of people are going to look at it and say that girls either shouldn't be in that kind of woodworking, or that they're not suited for it, or designed for it, whatever you want to say, or that the parents who basically, especially the parents who have maybe a boy and a girl, and they look at them and they say, oh, the boy, all he wants to do is play with guns, and all the girl wants to do is play with dolls.
Right.
And so the parent comes up with the idea, basically, that of course these are very different creatures in front of them, you know? And so basically they must be different.
That must be all genetic.
And exactly. It's all predetermined.
Right.
And that's the way things are.
And so because things are that way, you should just continue to let that develop on its own in their
Which
mind.
means dolls never leads to woodworking or science.
Right. It's almost like when I hear that really makes me think that what people think is simply genetics is the environment in so many ways, because people or children pick up on things, such subtle things, which the parents or are not even aware of.
So you have this parent that believes that they are letting their children develop independently,
but they're not.
But really, they've been influencing them the whole time, and they don't see it.
Yes.
So one day they see the kid playing with stones or whatever, and the girl, blankets or whatever, and then he thinks that that's the way it is.
Yeah.
That God made it that way. Right. That genetics made it that way.
And they don't realize that what they are giving little subtle hints about their views on culture and the world and the way that they grow up, the parents.
Yeah.
Not to mention, parents are a very small part of a child's world.
Yeah, the total environment.
Exactly, the total environment. Once you go, to school and you have friends and then just like TV and
the
marketing and everything around you influences you in so many different ways, which I think at least for many people or for many girls just kind of encourages them to not do these things even more. It kind of builds and builds and builds and builds.
Yeah.
And then at the end of it all, people think like, oh, that's just the way that child is.
Well, I think there's a lot of research that goes right along with that, that the girls in the lower grades, they get about equal math scores with boys, but in later grades they get lower.
Yeah.
So as they become more like girls in the typical sense.
Right.
So the best way to combat that is basically to make sure that the parent doesn't get in the way with negativity about their own problems, like, Pink Floyding Mother, the whole thing. And then you have the, well, Mother puts all her fears into you, right?
Mother puts all her fears into you. Yeah.
So basically, then you have the teachers doing the same thing.
Yeah.
If you don't do so well, then that's okay because it's not that important anyway.
Right.
And then you have this marketing and the kids acting kind of pushing you towards being more like
a
girl.
And I guess another funny thing is too how when that gets exacerbated, because it happens with all these girls basically are all growing up in the same culture more or less.
Yeah.
And then they get together and they reinforce that point of view as well. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like everything gets just stronger and stronger, this point of view, which I don't believe is like innate. I don't believe that girls are naturally not good with tools or good with building or working or good in science or mathematics.
They just aren't given the opportunity.
They aren't given the opportunity, and everything is against them in so many ways.
Well, I guess the early life strategies of a girl are definitely different than the strategies of a boy.
Yeah.
It's if they're being
praised for that. Well, I guess another thing too is that exactly what is successful for someone often is what someone continues to do.
They have to pursue. Yeah, why would you pursue something that is basically a negative?
Right. So if you do poorly on one math test and then you do great on your choir practice,
and then your friends are reinforcing
exactly, and they were like, oh my God, you did so well with singing, but it's not too bad. It's too bad you didn't do so well with the math.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter so much. and then that just kind of continues.
Well, there it is. It's just, yeah, exactly. It's a positive feedback
positive feedback loop, and then whatever you were successful at, it's almost like that is actually one thing that I think is just very important in a sense, is to have, I mean, I think that's important for anyone, but like the idea of feeling successful with things, especially when you're young. If you have bad experiences, then you just won't feel confident enough to take that next step. So if you are never set foot in, and you never do any woodworking, and then you do it one time and you do a terrible job using the handsaw because you've never ever touched something like that again, and you're like, oh my god, I'm just naturally really bad at this.
Yeah, it's easy to always go down
exactly.
that road.
I'm good at other things, but I'm just not good at this because you've never done it before, or you've done it once. It's so easy to have one negative experience
dictate everything
that you do from that on.
And that's in every subject, really.
Exactly. It's true for everything. So
I think if you want to improve anybody taking these subjects, especially the harder subjects, and when I say harder, I don't mean difficult. I just mean, hard science compared to soft science.
Yeah.
The more subjective sciences or something, or the social sciences, then you basically have to have them have some successes.
Yes.
And some
absolutely
building experiences, and positive feedback from family and friends and stuff.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to go against everybody when the environment is pushing against that kind of individual achievement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When everybody wants you to be soft and friendly.
Exactly. When everyone, there's no denying that there's so much emphasis put on looks and being pretty.
Like American Idol kind of stuff.
Well,
that's the goal.
And that's positive reinforcement right there. If you do your hair all pretty one day, you're going to get more attention than when you don't. Yeah. And that's just, the true for basically every part in that sense.
But a girl would have to be a fool not to pursue that strategy if it's succeeding.
If it's successful, then why wouldn't you?
And that's why it's
almost like
we're subject to evolution.
It's almost like if in order for her to get into woodworking, which may not be successful for her in the immediate sense with her friends, with popularity,
it's probably not going to be.
Exactly. It may, I think it would be successful in the overall sense of accomplishments and of confidence and things like that. So how do you even,
it's hard for a parent to actually bring this in too with woodworking, because a lot of parents aren't going to be familiar with it. And it is kind of something that seems like, some old guy in a garage kind of mentality.
Right.
It seems, it's in many ways it is kind of a weird thing. The guy who goes to his garage with the table saw and all that. That's not something you can pretty much talk to a 10-year-old girl about and say, that's what I want you to do.
Yeah.
There definitely have to be a different image associated with woodworking to make it, I don't know, maybe cooler or a little bit more. That's why I think the making is kind of concept. Yeah. If you call it making, and if you call it
woodworking is just an old term which makes you think of these men sitting in their basements, often, or old-fashioned.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No,
but it's definitely not appealing to a young girl.
Exactly, a 12-year-old girl
or a 12-year-old boy.
Exactly.
It doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter.
There's no distinction.
It's pretty much the same thing. It just doesn't seem like a cool new thing.
Yeah, exactly.
To do.
Yeah, and so energy doesn't go into it if it's not cool and new.
Right.
Yeah. No,
How do you justify it?
Yeah, and it's not connected to school at all or their friends. So it's really a generally a hard thing.
It's a very isolated thing in that sense if you were to do it. Unless of course it became a meme or a movement in more of a general sense related to school or education or something like that.
But if an adult doesn't show a kid how to use these stuff, they're not going to do it themselves. It's too much, it's a difficult, dangerous thing.
And it is kind of interesting in that sense that yes, most parents just can't do that or don't have the
just
resources.
Like they can't do fractions.
Exactly, but at the same time, it's I'm just thinking about growing up, and whatever was normal, whatever you did a lot, whatever was in your environment, that just became normal. Yeah. So in many ways, I wish I had grown up in a house where math was just constantly talked about, where chess was constantly played, where you're talking about history and science all the time. Because if that was your environment, then that was normal. Yeah. And then there would be
you have to follow those things. You have to compete in that area.
Exactly. And then that wouldn't be hard. It's almost like whatever you make more normal, if you make building normal, if you are in an environment where things like that are just happening all around you all the time and there's nothing strange about that, then that's such an easier world for you to pursue, to be in, because it's not like a big obstacle to go into that. You feel comfortable in that.
I guess that's what we all value, because in that situation, doing your hair and makeup would be abnormal.
Yeah.
And so the rest of the world would be more of a conflict for you.
Yeah,
then.
exactly.
So there's always something you have to give up.
Right.
But I guess
true.
in the whole sense.
Although, okay, if you say that it's something you're gonna give up, but then you can talk about like what is actually successful or beneficial for your mind
and for the world,
for becoming a more stable and disciplined person, as opposed, for yourself, for the future, and for the world. And of course, I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine that it's more beneficial for your mind and for your sense to get into woodworking and building, as opposed to get really good at doing your makeup.
Well, I agree with you.
I mean, maybe that sounds
beneficial.
harsh. I mean, it's not like I have nothing against doing makeup or whatever, but it's something that to me doesn't appear like you are bettering your mind.
And you're not adding to the world.
Exactly, you're not adding to the world. You're not creating something in that sense. That kind of reminds me of an article from the Atlantic Monthly. This was back in January or something.
Oh, this is the one where the woman talked about how she doesn't want to be called a maker.
Exactly, that's what it was called. Let me look up the title real quick.
Debbie something. I think it says I am not a maker.
Yeah. Her name was Debbie Chakra, and the article was called "Why I'm Not a Maker." It's January 23rd in the Atlantic Monthly, and in it she basically she feels kind of frustrated in the article, in a sense, because she thinks that we are in this maker culture where making things is what's valuable and what people are considering progress and good, and how that is often male or associated with males.
Yeah.
And she thinks that what is not valued is the female role, the traditional female roles, the caretakers, the educators, and
if you're not making something, but you're kind of you're in society and you're important.
Almost like if you are creating that structure in which other men
can
create and make, then you are not valued. She's frustrated with that point of view. And and it's almost like it's a hard kind of idea.
I guess what she was looking at, though, is that she's basically saying there's so much positive attention going towards people who make things and the creations they make,
right,
that you're ignoring all these other people. But
right,
it's always hard to say you congratulate the guy who hits the home run, not the guy who basically kept the bench warm.
Well, I mean, that is the idea that people are always applauding progress and
success.
Innovation and success, and people who are keeping cleaning and keeping the houses nice and neat and cooking the food are really traditionally really not that.
Yeah.
I guess
more people do that stuff than build buildings.
Right.
And that's
everybody. In all societies, there's always this.
She was looking at it where almost all of those roles are being filled by women, though. Those kind of filler roles. Yeah. Or the
and
non-creation
she was frustrated
roles.
with the idea that what's valued is not people but things.
Yeah.
But it's funny because. I mean, I see where she's coming from, but at the same time, I'm thinking, well, whatever thing that was created, isn't that what will last?
That's the monument to man.
Isn't that exactly? Isn't that the monument that will still be there when you're not?
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're talking about your children and grandchildren might be there, and that's the human factor maybe. But what about that one? Invention or something that led to progress and led to innovation, led to cool things which you can't even, fathom. You don't even know what's going to happen based on that one thing.
Well, that is the thing. Are we pushing progress? Or are we pushing kind of a social kind of valuing?
Yeah, you know what? I guess in some ways, what that really is too is: are we valuing the now? Are we valuing and trying to make people comfortable and that feel valued and feel included, or are we valuing the future
and the problems to deal with?
Exactly, the problems to deal with in the future, and the possible progress that will come from whatever we make today.
It does seem weird that anybody in a hard sciences, and I think she was an engineering
I
professor
think so. She was an
or something.
engineer, yeah.
I don't know why she would basically not see the value in the creations
Yeah.
that people have come up with
Yeah.
to deal with the problems in the world.
Right.
Because being nice about something or being endearing to someone is not solving a problem.
Yeah.
And yes, the water filtration system is a thing, and
But it's affecting people.
It's affecting a lot of people, and that is, yes, I realize the energy is going towards people who create such things, and money is going along with it. Investment money.
Exactly. I mean, I guess that was one of her points too. Was that people who are in code, who are computer programmers, and there's in those fields, so there's so much more prestige and money associated to those fields, as opposed to the teachers who are not as prestigious and just caretakers in general, and how there isn't as much energy or as much value maybe put on them, where she was saying that there should be. But
I guess
simple. I mean, it goes back to like what is being valued all throughout. I mean, society always values. I mean, okay, right now it's programmers and it has been for some time, but it's always been valuing the ones that are actually making a difference, creating something, building things, coming up with the vaccines that are exactly, or weapons, or whatever it may be that will
and so they're often negatively associated to men in terms of that they're toys or trinkets, or that they're video game mentalities.
Yeah.
But those things do get us into the future.
Right.
They're not.
And then if it's a good future or not can be debated.
Well, but I guess the bottom line is you want to go into the future with all your cylinders going there.
Yeah,
you don't want to just go in a weak way.
Right.
Because
what about the day when the aliens come?
Or the asteroid?
Or the asteroid. I mean, there's a reason why, energy is put towards, energy is put towards STEM and and science, and push your kids in that direction.
Can you imagine if you didn't? What would you push them into?
What would you exactly? With what was that statistics that like half of all the jobs will be gone in 20 years or something like that? To automation.
Yeah.
And so if you don't push them into those areas, then what are you pushing them into?
That's it.
Yeah.
It'd be crazy to push them into, or guide them, or whatever you want to call it, guide them into something that was basically either not going to exist or not give them a good living.
Right, because you want your children to be successful, and
So it's not surprising that there's so much energy put towards getting people in science, but then you're still got to deal with all the roadblocks you put in their way for them to be successful.
Right.
In the science or math.
Yes.
Or computers.
And you need to make them feel, you need to create an environment in where that is a welcoming area, in a sense, for everybody.
Yeah.
And
that's why the money's there.
It also goes back to the concept of playing, and how I think many boys, at least traditionally from this environment that has been created, have been playing more roughly with things, and playing with things that, exactly, that is kind of building things and things like that. And that directly leads into this building things, computer programming, or making things, kind of inventing new things. It's all very related to the concept of playing with things.
Yeah.
And in many ways,
it's sometimes playing with things without
a specific goal in mind.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that a lot of men or boys kind of grew up with that much more, and are better prepared for the future in that sense. Are better prepared to be successful because they did that kind of playing much more when they were young.
And I guess what you mean is they didn't associate a high problem with failure.
No,
because they didn't really care.
Exactly, they were much. It was much more. Yeah, it was exactly.
See how it goes.
Yeah, much more playing and destroying and getting. I mean, it's the thing about like breaking bones. I mean, boys in general break so many more bones when they're young. I mean, you broke like lots of bones. I never broke. I broke my one of my toes once. But like so much more careful.
Yeah.
And that comes with the idea of
that's
playing.
Like the risk taking too, though. That goes right along
with the
table saws or other kinds of things.
Of not being afraid of those things. Right.
And not being afraid that there's no point to you getting it. Like, in other words, just trying it. like that it's not a big deal if you waste the money.
Right.
More boys or
risk-taking
more
in that
guys
sense.
are basically, they can convince themselves very easily that something is really worth it, and women are generally more introspective.
Exactly,
and
more
they can
planning,
convince
more-
themselves not to.
Right.
Or at least that's the way the environment has
That it has been
created
so
them.
far. Exactly. That doesn't mean that they're naturally that way.
Yeah. So we're gonna basically say that there's no way that there is like a natural male and a natural female.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think that if you sent all the children to the moon and you created this weird little colony and they were all treated exactly the same and there was no cultural influences.
If they were raised by robots.
They were raised by robots. There was no TV, no media. There was no difference in their clothing or the toys they played with. They were not treated differently in the way people interacted with them. I mean, I guess it's kind of funny because I'm not saying that those things aren't true in a sense, that women aren't caretakers. But
They
I'm
certainly have been.
saying that men, there's no reason why men can't. Of course, women do have the connection with the baby in a different way, which is altering things. Like, so from that point
But
of
it
view,
doesn't mean men should be women either.
no, I don't think it does.
But a lot of people think that too.
Yeah, they do. They do.
So there's the conflict, and I think the article mentioned it. Gloria Steinem's comment about that maybe we should raise the boys more like girls and the girls like boys.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, we have been trying to raise girls more like boys, but why have we not been trying to raise boys more like girls?
It seems like maybe it's
Was
a good
that a
idea just to
comment?
raise them normal,
Normal.
a whole like in a normal way,
Yeah.
where they have solid values and
Right.
solid kind of
But
expectations.
it's funny though, because I guess when you say that, traditionally, if you say the girls are raised more timidly and softer and boys are raised like more rough and tumble and go out there and fight and play and do things like that, you're basically saying that everybody should be raised more like boys. in a
Pretty much.
sense.
Well, I guess you could say a lot of things. I wouldn't call raising someone who wants to create and get into math and history and science a boy. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't call somebody who plays baseball a boy automatically either.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I
Right.
would agree with that characterization that you're trying to raise girls like boys.
I guess, yeah. It makes me think about something about how the environment is so important, like how we are, how we grow up, and how people who grow up in normal ways usually turn out pretty normal, and how it's only in extreme situations that often people are different, are interesting. Yeah, I'm reading a book called The Philosophical Breakfast Club, and it's about Babbage and Herschel and a couple of different guys, but they do talk about Ada Lovelace in it. So Ada Lovelace was, some people claim that she was the first computer programmer, but it's very loosely defined. But what I thought was really interesting was that she was extremely, her father was Lord Byron, and her mother was very concerned that she would inherit his questionable, his mind, which was not exactly stable at all times. And so she wanted to really educate or put her in mathematics early on to help temper her mind. And she studied when she was like 4 or 5 years old. She had her studying mathematics 8 hours a day or something, and if she didn't behave, she put her in the closet. And it was this really extreme situation, and it produced a very interesting person. I don't know how healthy she was in all other aspects of her life.
Well, recently didn't someone say that to us? We were talking discussion, and someone said, how do you know when someone gets through something? Or is it what was that now? How do people deal with things? How do they get through it?
Yeah.
Or, when is something like too much for
Right,
someone?
like how come some people survive and get through something and some people do not?
Well, I guess when we're talking about Ada Lovelace, she probably had a very horrible life.
Yeah.
But in many ways, all we will ever remember from a lot of these people is their achievements.
Yeah, exactly.
So how they were
exactly, and how comfortable of a life they had, which
matter.
while maybe important to them at the moment, is not
certainly doesn't matter to us.
It doesn't matter to us now.
Yeah.
In the whole idea of weird and situations that you grew up in. I mean, you just take child prodigies, where the parents are like, I'm gonna have my 6-year-old be the best chess player that ever existed by the time they're adults, and they have them play chess nonstop. And of course, those people are really good at chess, and they might be interesting and indifferent, but
Well, I think that has happening less these days because
because there's just more of a normal kind of world.
There's a lot of normality going on.
Yeah.
And that basically means that everybody is kind of the same. Their family, they watch the same TV shows. They go to the same kind of schools and everything.
When you think about the world, like during the Depression or earlier than that too, and you had these extremes. Okay, Thomas Edison comes to mind.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a rather extreme
He left home when he was 12.
He left home when he was 12. He was on his own. He had nobody helping him.
And he was selling newspapers on a train.
And he created this little
laboratory,
lab at one of the trains. What a drive! I mean, what a to even do that. And there were so many more of those kind of extreme examples where today social services would be there in 2 seconds, and that would never have been allowed to develop.
Well, I guess the thing always goes back to how much damage is really being on something when someone gets hurt in some way. Maybe the damage isn't as great. Maybe a little problems here and there, or even a lot of problems.
Yeah.
It's almost like you can't make everybody the same. Maybe you shouldn't want to.
Well, yeah, I think that is a good point.
Or at least you should basically think that maybe these negative situations that happen to people should not be dwelled upon.
It's almost, well, if you dwell upon them, then you make them worse.
Important. Yeah.
You make them important, and you make them something to focus on.
Remember when Caesar Milan,
the dog whisperer,
the dog would be afraid to walk on the floor, and so because it was slippery.
Yeah.
And then the owner, of course,
oh my God,
they react to it,
yeah,
and they make sure that the dog is having a problem walking.
Right.
And so what does he do? He grabs the leash and walks him across the floor.
Right. It makes not a big deal.
Because he doesn't make it an issue.
For him, yeah, exactly. Yeah. He doesn't remember a
the
bad
dog
situation.
Has no memory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The dog just is reacting to
the owner.
Almost like a muscle memory and the owner's reaction and energy.
So it can be overcome very easily.
Yeah.
So often, so many of these problems are associated
I bet that's true for so many human situations as well, where a bad situation is just emphasized where.
But it's emphasized about by those people around you.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, there is memory. You have the memory of these situations, whatever it is. But then everybody around you is reinforcing that.
Right. And yeah, exactly. Okay, so then let's just go back to woodworking and building and making and girls growing up. So if you have, it's that exact same thing, that with the dog with the slippery floor.
So how
where it's overemphasized, where, oh my God, I did not do well on my math test, or I did not, play rough in the woods. I went, because I went with all the other girls and played with the dolls,
Well, then there's ways to fix this stuff.
Yeah.
But I think it's obviously going to be difficult to fix it when they're older, depending on their age.
Yeah.
It's like the idea we talked about last time of maker spaces. And maybe groups of girls would like to go together when they're in their 20s or whatever.
Yeah.
But do you really want that to be the only way they go when they're young? You don't want
it's
them
almost
to be
like
that way.
if you do. I mean, that's awesome if girls go and the maker spaces and get more into it.
You mean because it's a social thing?
It's a social thing.
They're not really going to create.
Exactly. It's almost like it's kind of a separate thing that maybe you'll like it, maybe you'll get into it, but you're not really going to completely use it and have it relate to how you do other things in life. I mean, maybe, but
yeah, it's a way for somebody to make money off those spaces, of course.
Yeah.
But it's not the same thing as getting, somebody when they're very young into woodworking and understanding the physics of the different woods or anything like that. That seems what you want to happen, to make it normal, not weird.
I agree.
And all kinds of making stuff too, anything.
Yeah, it's like we're talking about woodworking because that's the world that we're in some ways. But I mean, I think it relates to anything, whether that is working on cars or playing with, you're working with metal or, I guess the bottom line is
doing things is interesting and it's fun. So no matter what that takes the form of, it doesn't really matter.
Exactly. I guess the point is to not be afraid of failing. Not be afraid of breaking things, and
having that not the parents put that on the kid either.
Yeah, right.
To make sure that they
not having that bad situation.
So the parents have to basically back away a lot.
Yeah. Another thing I think is kind of funny is that I just think that so many men are so much more confident in these areas than girls are.
At least they make believe they are.
Exactly. Maybe they make believe they are, but if you have two people sometimes and they have exactly the same knowledge level, and the guy thinks that, oh my god, I'm pretty much an expert at this area, and the girl's like, oh, I'm such a beginner.
Yeah.
I really don't know what I'm doing. Don't ask me anything, really, because I really don't know what I'm doing. And then the guy's like,
they have the same basic experience level.
They have basically the same knowledge level, experience level, and it's just a matter of perception. So obviously that guy is going to do more. He's going to try more because he just thinks that whatever he's doing, I mean, he's not afraid in the same way.
That is the concept of where you get when a guy, you ask a question and they know the answer. They make believe they know the answer, and then pretty much everybody around them believes it.
Right. Of course, this is not all guys. You know, it's a big.
But
more.
For the most part, if you ask someone a question, a guy, they're going to try to answer.
Yeah.
And the girl will generally, not.
Yeah.
More often than not.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it says, well, why does anybody, why do they continue to do that? Why is that but everybody believes them when they say they know something.
Yeah.
They just assume that it must be true. Or if you have an answer, you must know what the right answer is. Girls don't do that as much.
And that just breeds confidence, and then the girls
even if it's in
like
the completely wrong
reaction.
direction. Even if it's basically the absolute wrong answer.
Yeah.
It is weird like that.
It is weird. And it's so hard to change because there are so many factors that go into that, in a sense. It's not just one thing. I mean, yes, like we're saying, the parents have a massive influence on the child, but that is one aspect, or maybe a big part of it. But there's so much culture. There's so much there's so many books and movies and music and around that is just continues to push that kind of perception of what a good girl is and what's successful and what's
I guess
important.
there's a lot of women who get into some woodworking too, and it's kind of more an art point of view.
Yeah.
And they are able to get into the field because it's
from
come
that
from
softer point of view. Yeah.
Even though they are doing woodworking or metal or whatever it is.
It's almost like they tricked themselves into it.
Yeah.
Or they took a shortcut in a sense. Where
like they're into physical art or something like that.
Yeah, I see that more with like turning and like making bowls and spoons and things like that a lot.
Yeah, on Instagram there seems to be a lot of girls doing that. A lot of girls
doing that, right.
And I don't know if they consider themselves woodworkers. They never showed themselves on a table saw.
No.
But I'm sure they're using a table saw.
Yeah.
But maybe they're trying to de-emphasize that because it's not feminine.
I mean, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What does that mean in a sense? Being feminine and doing these kinds of things. Do you think that they're at odds?
It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird because basically it means that you don't want people looking at you like a guy.
No. I don't want people looking at me like a guy.
No, but guys don't think that someone's going to look at them like a girl.
Right.
So it's kind of weird.
It's almost like it only goes one way there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there are plenty of male chefs and hairdressers that they certainly don't think that someone's going to look at them like a girl. Right.
You mentioning chefs though just brings makes me think about like how guys just do so much things so much more absolutely. There's a high percentage of chefs that are men who are like high level, who are like, I'm gonna be the best chef.
Yeah.
And not as many women. But women cook all
I think that's changing, but there does seem to be basically a difference in the way they approach it. Yeah. That probably comes from their history and all that. That environment that made them interested. Yeah. A lot of, I guess in general too. Well, I don't know.
That might just be the Y chromosome coming out too. However, how much does that affect the behavior as opposed to the environment?
That concept that the more extremes are in males. Obviously, they only have that one X. Yeah. So they're going to basically, Right. It's used as a catch-all excuse for pretty much everything. It's almost like, whether it's schizophrenia or high achievement.
Right. High risk. Yeah.
Now, that's going to probably explain something, let's say.
Right.
But it wouldn't explain everything.
Yeah.
There's this constant push towards something from everybody around you that's going to make you go into a direction. It depends on the age too. One of the interesting things was in the demographics in the YouTube channel.
Oh yeah,
the idea.
The Darbin Orvar YouTube channel.
Yeah, so much of there is a lot of males obviously watching these kinds of videos, And pretty much everybody's demographic seems to be
Very
pretty
similar.
much the same.
Yeah, who are in this field.
But the one thing that I think is being a bit overlooked is that on the lower end of age, it's much more equal.
It is interesting, yeah.
In fact, the actual, and between the ages of 13 and 17,
yeah, exactly. That's how
there's
they break it
actually
down.
the same number,
for
of boys and
exactly.
girls watching the videos.
Yeah.
Now, granted, it's not a huge percentage, but it is a significant percentage on the female side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It skews
the
much younger.
female skews so much younger.
Like it's amazing. From 13 to like 25 is a massive group for females.
Yeah, not that many older women are watching the channel.
Things are changing. We just don't even see it.
Yeah.
So that's
Right.
really interesting.
Right. Yeah, that is really cool.
Obviously, what is it like? From 25 to 44 is the big group of males. But for women, it's like 13 to 25.
Yeah.
So obviously, sometimes it's when they get old enough to have a house or something,
Yeah.
and then they
Right.
get into woodworking more, or they're just kind of trying to find a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what it is with the younger girls, but I wonder what it is.
Yeah, I wonder what influences. Why are they looking at that? Why?
I don't know.
How did it even enter their minds?
I don't know what they're searching for,
Yeah.
or it's hard to tell what's going on there. But the absolute numbers are showing that
Yeah.
that there's a fair number of girls equal to the number of guys
Yeah.
who are actually
That is-
watching at
that
young
is really
ages,
cool, yeah.
which is kind of what you'd expect, right? Eventually,
As more girls and women are being,
In the
introduced
world.
in these
I
subjects.
guess they're in many ways there's more girls being brought up more, I guess, like boys,
Yeah.
where it's more aggressive.
Right.
They're seeing their parents are showing. I'm not really sure, but
Yeah.
their parents are maybe showing them the same opportunities exist for both
Yeah.
for boys and girls.
Maybe.
Maybe that would explain something of it.
Maybe.
But the bottom line is that there's the same number of boys and girls at young ages watching the videos.
Right.
That's surprising.
That is surprising and very cool.
So anybody else out there with a YouTube channel should check those analytics.
Yeah,
It
I'd be
would
curious to see if
interesting.
that's the same for others too.
Yeah, that is. It's very interesting. I guess one point that is, I guess, universally missed is that men and women aren't really in competition with each other.
I think that is like something that is often overlooked.
People are in competition with other people, but men and women really, considering how they pair up for marriage or other things, they are constantly in a confused state.
Yeah.
So it's not where it's very clear cut, like, two people are going for a position and they just happen to be male and female. Well, that's just because they're both competing for the same position.
Yeah.
But males and females aren't in competition at all. Obviously, historically,
Right.
you can't have
to
one
work
without
together.
the other. Yeah, and they do.
Yeah.
So the idea that they each fill a certain role or
Right.
they're, that the group is competitive is kind of ridiculous.
That is actually one thing that I'm not thrilled about, like the feminist movement in that sense. When they all group together, all women, and they say like, we as a group has to get stronger and better.
Yeah.
It's almost like the whole concept of like the Lean movement
Yes.
with Sheryl Sandberg, and and even on their website they have like, oh, let's start circles with other women and grow support, so we can support each other.
You're saying that
And-
maybe that would kind of insulate them.
I think that is like putting us against them. It has this mentality that is excluding, and that is, I think it's not a great mentality, because it's almost like they're saying that women have to get stronger, have to get more confident, and we have to fight the gap that exists between men and women. And the way to do so is to group together and be
Yeah.
stronger in numbers.
Support each other.
To support each other, and like I just don't like that. I don't like that concept, that point of view. They're really saying that we are at war against each other in a
Yeah.
sense. We need to make the men smaller and less. We need to make them weaker in a
Or
sense.
they're, in many ways, they're saying, let's try to adopt the characteristics that men have, like negotiation, not
Right.
afraid.
Well, which I don't think that's a bad idea, to kind of learn from what works in many situations and adapt those to personally
Yeah.
become more successful. I think that is good.
But those,
use
negotiation
whatever
isn't
works.
a male tactic.
No, exactly. That's what I mean. It's like use what works. If that
Yeah.
works for most negotiations, which happen to be that men are often better at negotiating than women, then use those techniques. That's awesome.
I guess you're basically seeing the environments that these people grow up in, though, are where they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't use those tactics because they feel like they are breaking of what it is their history was about.
Yeah.
They're going against their mothers or whatever it is.
The be polite girl kind of.
So they basically have to get over that.
Yeah.
They have to basically take control for themselves.
Yeah.
And then they don't have to look at it as like a men versus women thing.
Yeah.
Because if there was men versus women, there would be no us. There would be no people.
Yeah.
Because if there was actually a competition between the humans, that would be kind of weird.
Right.
So it's kind of strange to talk about it in that competition
and,
sense.
Okay, that kind of makes me think about the whole concept of quotas and like with governments and companies who are saying, okay, we need X percentage.
Especially European governments.
Exactly. Especially European governments who are saying we need X percentage of women to be in parliament or whatever it is. And it's like, I almost have mixed feelings about that. Because on one hand, I hate that concept that you would get the job or whatever because you're filling a quota, that it's not based on, what do you call it? Yeah, exactly, merit. It's not based on merit. But on the other hand, I also think that having more women just being represented in the world is very important for other girls. Just the idea that they are around, that they're more visible. So while I don't like the idea of a quota, I want to encourage more women to be visible.
This is the concept also where who's on the $10 or $20 bill.
Yes, the $10 or $20 bill. Yes, where there's this movement where they want to put a woman on it.
Yeah. Well, I think the women in the women's group wants it to be on the $20 bill, and the government
it's the more frequently used bill.
Yeah, the government wants to put it on the $10.
Well, who uses a $10 bill? Come on.
But so the argument here is that obviously political figures or
a lot of social activists is the people they are proposing.
Well, yeah, they're okay, but historically, all of the people on the money are
you mean like
politicians,
that? Right? They're
and usually political.
They're
not scientists or anything.
No, exactly. Hamilton, who's not a president, but yeah.
And so they basically want to try to find
Benjamin Franklin, he's not a president.
Yeah, they want to try to find a woman, usually in the social area, to be on the bill.
Yeah.
But we were talking about that it seems so much more interesting and to put someone who's in science.
Someone who created something.
Yes.
Yeah.
A woman who's actually in a kind of a competitive, like, global field.
Right, someone who you can look up to. But the funny thing about that, though, as we talked about that, and I couldn't really think of anybody.
No.
And that is a problem right there. Of course, maybe there have been more men than women who have been in these areas. But the concept that the people that we are aware of, we are aware of them in many ways because they have been lifted up through by the media.
Yeah.
Exactly, by writers, by magazines, by TV.
Yeah.
They have featured these people, and they have not featured these women.
So the quality of the men that we know about in science is likely no different than the quality of the women we don't know in science.
Exactly, very likely. And then I found an article that listed like 50 female American scientists throughout the years, and I hadn't heard of many.
No.
And there were so many. Yeah. And one of them was even a Nobel laureate.
Yeah,
in medicine.
Yeah.
And
it seems like it's worth it to make somebody like that on the bill.
Just because then that person would be brought
studied.
Up. Exactly, would be studied.
The day after it happened, the kids in school would be learning about that.
Yeah.
Well, they would be learning about the science that she did too.
Right.
And I guess the other thing is that the women that they want to really choose, Eleanor Roosevelt or Sacagawea and all that.
Yeah.
Those women are kind of more traditional women.
They are, yeah.
And they're they're in the either social science or some kind of
first lady
suffrage movement or something like that.
More of that behind the scenes, in a sense.
And those are kind of more traditional, where women have been. At least that's what we are told.
Yeah.
But they're not. They were in those science fields too.
Right.
So it makes a lot of sense. put somebody on there who actually would be a role model
today.
Yeah.
It would be a role model today
Yeah.
for these girls who are going into these areas.
Because they would learn about it in school.
Yeah.
And you're everybody. I mean,
Make
when are
these
you going to
people
learn
more
more about
visible.
Eleanor Roosevelt?
Yeah.
I mean, and she was only a first lady.
Yeah.
Come on. You know, I mean, she didn't win political office. You know.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
She didn't achieve on her own in a way that I guess are
I think
competitive
that's a key
with men.
point. What achieving on your own. It's not like I don't know. It's tricky because many of these women were important in their own right and did good things.
But social things.
But yeah, exactly, social things. So I think Emily Dickinson was on that list.
I guess it's
too,
what the woman
and
wrote in
more-
the article, that she's valuing those kind of women, or
Right.
those she feels that those kind of women are undervalued.
Yeah.
But yes, I would rather have the astronomer or the biologist as the one on the money
Right.
than a social activist.
It's almost like, okay, let's say a long time in the future we have the, aliens come to the planet and they look, through the records of history,
Yeah.
and they're like, what led to these things that we are now so advanced that we're out in space or whatever, our forefathers,
Yeah.
or come back and, those are the things they will look at. Those scientific accomplishments that
Yeah.
will have led to these.
Those
other
are the only things that are kind of universally
Whereas
across the universe will be important.
exactly.
When did you come up with those advances?
Right, not just. I guess a lot of the social activist movements is more historically important from a country, point of view, from defining the country and the social, the people
the
in
changes
it,
in
the
that
changes in the demographics and things like that, and less valuable in a world sense, in a. Yeah.
But when you're advancing the fields in cosmology, it's a global sense.
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
affecting everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That's the difference between a social point of view on the money and traditional kind of women's views or the way people view women, and then the non-traditional view would be the woman who achieves in the way that's more like hard science.
Yeah.
I think that's a better way to show it.
Right. I agree. I think so. Put a
So
scientist on
they
the
should
on the
just put
$20 bill.
They should. They shouldn't bother with trying to argue about it. It doesn't have to be known either.
Yeah, right.
Just because we don't know somebody doesn't mean they're not
valuable,
worth knowing
right.
about. And the people we do know about, often we know about them because they have a big mouth or because some
they
reporter
made news in some way.
got them up there.
Right.
If you asked everybody in the world or the country or whatever who was a famous scientist they know, they would all say Einstein or something like
right.
that. But are you saying Einstein was smarter
or better than
these other guys
Yeah.
or other people?
Yeah.
No way.
Right.
That's a joke. There's
He
no
certainly got
evidence
more
for
media
that.
attention.
He got a lot of media attention, and he was quite a character.
Yeah, right. Which
That
certainly
helps,
helps.
too.
Yeah.
And basically he achieved something that was kind of concrete. Also, there was a news story written about it as soon as it happened with the eclipse.
Yeah.
And so it was a little bit more like relatable. And so, and a lot of the, I got to say, a lot of the women we saw in the pictures for the 50 women scientists who might be, they don't really seem like partying types. Or
They didn't make news for their appearance or their eccentricness. Or
exactly.
Their,
It is,
their
it's
unusual behavior. Okay, well then you have like Ayn Rand or somebody like that. Of course, she's not American in that sense. The idea of being.
She was kooky though.
She was. That's what I'm getting at. She was a little bit particular.
Yeah.
And
well, that's the thing is again with the social movements, and she was again on the social side.
Yeah.
Those kind of things are very subject to opinions.
Yeah.
And they're subject to kind of, do you agree with these people?
Right.
But you don't have to agree with a scientist to know that she did something.
I guess that it really goes back to that, which is also why parents have a harder time teaching their children fractions, because there's that black and white there.
Yeah.
And that's the same reason why, it's...
Yeah, every parent thinks they understand the causes of the Civil War or something like that. Or,
they have opinions on it and nothing else.
But, when it comes to algebra, maybe they don't have any opinions at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the same thing.
So in many ways, in order for a world that is more progressive, shall we say, if there was just more focus on the facts, on things that actually you can't debate.
Yeah.
There would be more social cohesion in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the debate wouldn't be happening if you took those socially oriented women out of the picture for the $1 or the $20 bill.
Mm-hmm. Who can argue?
They wouldn't
whether...
really. Yeah. How are you gonna? Because there's no political. Whether it's a mathematician or a biologist, no one really is going to care.
Right.
No one really knows who they are anyway.
Right.
But Eleanor Roosevelt or Harriet Tubman is a big debate.
Yeah.
What group do you want to try to please more?
Right.
Yeah. Well, biologists and cosmologists don't really argue too much.
No.
They don't even meet each other. So they're not going to have a problem.
Yeah.
Maybe they should just limit the whole thing to global people anyway.
Well,
stick Marie Curie on
I was
there
thinking Marie
because
Curie.
everybody knows who she is.
Dislike Marie.
She died for her work.
She did. I always liked Marie
or Rosalind
so much.
Franklin.
She's another one. I always liked her as well.
Yeah, she died for her work too.
Yeah, radiology both. Yeah. I used to go on these short little trips to the woods nearby and pretend that I had left, for good. Which of course I'd be back, an hour later, or 2 hours later. But I used to pretend. I used to have this little handkerchief and I packed my little apple in it or something. I put it, on a stick over my shoulder, like a hobo, and I was out exploring, and I was going to go away.
And was that prompted from like Pippi Longstocking or something?
Yeah, actually, I like Pippi Longstocking a lot. I think she's actually a great role model in the sense that she's not afraid.
Yeah.
She was also alone. Her father was a sea captain who was out on the sea. It's a very fantastical story. She had no respect for authority. She chased the police officers and dangled and played with them, and she was fearless, and she was kind of, she did silly things. She baked like 1 million gingerbread cookies and put them all over her house, and she did silly things, but she was not afraid.
And not a typical girl.
Not a typical girl in that sense at all. Mm-hmm. And she befriended this sister and brother, and they thought that she was just, they were fascinated by her, and that's kind of, they go on adventures together. Mm-hmm. And Pippi Longstocking is a big deal in Swedish culture, and Astrid Lindgren, who wrote that story, wrote so many very interesting stories where the children's perspectives were really put in focus.
It seems though that is a perfect example of when a writer who writes a character, they seem to inherently know that girl didn't come from a normal behavior, a normal family.
Yeah.
If her father's not there and her mother is dead or whatever.
Even in the story, she was she was a
the writer,
fantastical creation.
Yeah, well, the writer knew that she had to come from a different
she
environment.
Couldn't come from her father and mother couldn't have a
they
normal life
like
with siblings, and it had to be created out of something extraordinary.
There's such a fear, it seems recently, of people having any kind of abnormality. Mm-hmm. That if you're a single mother or you're raising kids, it's so bad.
Which is interesting because everybody wants to be unique and special, but nobody wants to be abnormal.
Yeah, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. But it's almost like one is socially accepted and one is not.
Well, one you choose and one is imposed on you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But everything good or interesting, I should say, maybe not good, comes out of something strange.
Exactly.
Or just not normal.
Yeah.
And obviously, if your mother died and your father's a sea captain, that's definitely abnormal, and you're going to be a different kind of person.
Yeah. Isn't that the plight of the writer, that, if you never lived or did anything interesting, then, you can't write, interestingly, Hemingway out in the war or something like that. Yeah, I think that is about it.
If anybody has any other thoughts on this subject, Please comment. Yeah, you should rate. What is that? Rate, like, and subscribe.
Subscribe.
Or whatever it's called.
And thanks for the comments on iTunes. Very much appreciate that.
Yes.
And if there are any more comments,
ratings and comments are very much appreciated.
Very much appreciated, so we can grow and reach more people.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you have any thoughts on the subject in general, though, be very interested in hearing that. So
I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of thoughts on this subject.
It's a very interesting, it's a very apropos subject. Thank you so much for listening. Oh, by the way, I'm Lynn. And
I'm Matt. This is the Darbin Orvar Podcast.
Thanks for listening.
We'll be back soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.